We are learning. I'm going to shut off that filter if you don't mind. I'm going to lower it a lot. The Mahral from Prague wrote many svarim, and his svarim have their own language. They're challenging svarim. So, at the same time, that they're difficult. This particular sefer called Netivot Olam is a little bit easier. Okay, or it's a lot easier. Okay. I figure in leading up to Shavuos, we'll learn through this. We'll learn through some of the Netiv haTorah. So he begins with Parak Aleph. I encourage you to take notes if you have a pen. If you would like a pen, I have one pen here. Okay, you want a pen? Okay, pass it down to. Sorry, it's the gentleman behind you. Okay. Okay. So he begins with a pasuk in Mishlei. Mishlei Dalid. The pasuk says, "Vayoreni," which means "and he instructed me." It shares a root with the word Torah. Okay, Yorah, Torah. Vayoreni, and he instructed me. Vayomer li, and he said to me,
"Do you want to listen to the rabbi's drash?"
Yitmach divarai libecha. Let your mind hold on to my words. Shemor mitzvotai v'chiyeh. Keep my commandments, and you will live. Okay? One more time. He instructed me and said to me, let your mind hold on to my words, keep my commandments, and you will live. Says the Mahral. Shlomo HaMelech. Now, this pasuk is almost like you don't even need any commentary really to explain it almost, right? It's pretty obvious.
Turn off the light in the bedroom, please. And you don't fire everything, but get dressed.
I'm gonna mute you, Mr.
Dressed.
I'm taking this down.
Is that Zoom?
Yeah.
Sounded like a commercial.
Yeah. The Gemara, it happens to be, by the way, that the Gemara Nida, where the Gemara tells us that a fetus is taught the entire Torah, brings this pasuk. Okay? To support the idea that it's like Hashem is telling all of us. When did He tell us? In the womb. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the Mahral. Shlomo HaMelech Olav HaShalom Ratza Lahadir Sa'adam Ala Torah. Shlomo HaMelech wants to warn us about the Torah. The Amar Kasher Nasan HaTorah El HaAdam. David, I think you can read it. All right, there we go. Okay. The Amar Kasher Nasan HaTorah El HaAdam. And it says that when he gave the Torah to a person, Amar Hashem Yisbarach El HaAdam Yitmach Devarei Libecha. Klamar HaTorah Shidirei Hashem Yisbarach. So what are these words of Hashem that God says that you should hold on to my words? What are the words of Hashem? HaTorah, the Torah itself are the words of Hashem. Yitmoch libecha, you should hold on to them. Ki leiv ha'adam sham ha'chayim. Now, there's always discussion about how do you translate the word leiv. Okay?
You say it's mind.
I always say mind, almost always, okay? But either way, it's going to be correct, right? Ki leiv ha'adam.
He has libecha and leiv, so there's a connection there. You might think that it really has to do with
your heart. Leiva Adam Shamachayim, the heart of man, that's where life is. The haTorah tachzik libcha. The Torah will strengthen your heart. V'titein lecha chayim, and give you life. V'tishmar mitzvotai v'cheya, and then you obviously have to do the mitzvos and live. Ki divrei Torah tomchim u'ma'ashrim kol olam kulo. The words of Torah support. The word osher basically means content, but essentially it's a verb in this case. Basically, it gives a certain standing to the whole world.
I would say probably because the Mahral, it's not heart or mind, it's probably soul.
Okay. I don't know enough. I don't know enough Mahral language yet.
That he's very.
Yeah. Ve'ech lo yihu ma'ashrim v'tomchim es ha'adam atzmo she'osik b'Torah v'hi im ha'adam. So basically, he's saying the same way, and he hasn't actually expressed his idea just yet. We'll get there in a second. But he's saying the same way that Torah basically keeps the world going, so too Torah keeps the human being going. In other words, if a human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm, the human being to the world, the Torah keeps the world going, so too the Torah keeps the human being going. There's a story with various Gedolei Yisrael who would sit down on Matzah Yom Kippur, right after the fast was over, and even before eating anything, they'd open up a Gemara and they would learn. And they asked him, like, why are you doing that? Why don't you eat something first? They said, there needs to be Torah being learned 24/7 around the world. And right now, there might not be anybody else learning. So we got to keep the world going. Yeah, that's why God created time zones, right? Why is the world round? Why are there Jews scattered throughout the world? There's always somebody learning somewhere. Okay.
So the ma'ashrim, could that be enriched like ma'ash?
But it's with an aleph, so Osher with an aleph essentially means like a certain kind of level of happiness and sense of content. Usually, that's what it means. Okay. This idea that he just basically assumed that you know, but now let's go into it a little bit more in depth. What does it mean that the words of Torah support the world? Of course, the source of this is our Chazal, our sages. She'amru, and he quotes the Gemara in Shabbos Peiches. Kilikach Hosif Hey Bishishi. How do you spell the letter Hey? Hey Aleph. Trick question. Okay. Kilikach Hosif Hey Bishishi. What does the Torah say in Bereshis Aleph Lamed Aleph? The Torah says, Vayerev Vahivoker Yom HaShishi. As opposed to the other days of the week, when God, in the story of the creation, what does God say? Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. But by Shabbos, or by Friday specifically, it says Yom HaShishi. Why does it say HaShishi? So there's a concept called a Hey Hayediyah in Tanakh. The Hey Hayediyah is the Hey as the prefix. It doesn't just mean the, but in other words, in places where the letter Hey could mean the, but you know that it doesn't really make sense because it just said Yom Echad, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. So it should say Yom Shishi. That would be consistent when describing the first day, second day, third day, fourth day. Why, when it comes to the sixth day, does it actually say the sixth day? It's obviously extra. So it's a Hey Hayediyah. It's a Hey that is like, hearken, pay attention. This word that you're about to read in front of you is a very important one. What is the importance of the word Shishi in this case? Lomar, to teach us, ki kol ma'aseh bereshis, the whole act of creation, hayu tuluyim va'omdim ad Shishi b'sivan. It is basically in a state of, it literally means hanging and standing, but there's like a suspended animation. Is that the right word? Where basically when the time comes, so then everything else will kick in. But until then, we're just gonna hang out. It's like lahavdil in sci-fi when you travel, millions of light years, so they just kind of freeze everything until you get there, and they just put a timer on there, and you hope it doesn't go off too early. Right, that's a lonely place to be. Okay, so on the sixth day of Sivan, that's when the actual purpose of the world will come into being. What happened on the sixth day of Sivan? Historically? Sinai. Im Yekablu Yisrael haTorah mutav. If the Jewish people will accept the Torah from Hashem, then that will be good. V'im lav yachzer ha'olam l'tovavo. If not, God will cease creating, and the world will go back to what it was prior to creation.
Very interesting.
Im kain, divrei Torah mechazkim v'tomchim hakol. That's the case, and it's actually the words of Torah are actually what gives kiyum to the world. It's what keeps the world going. Ad sheyesh l'olam kiyum. V'chol ze b'nei ki haTorah hi seider ha'adam ve'izeh ma'aseh yenoheg. Okay, so now he wants to explain a little bit the depth of it.
That's why it's so
Okay. What is the Torah? Another way, another perspective on Torah. Seder ha'adam, the order of humanity. That is to say, it's how we conduct ourselves. How we should be organized in our actions. V'zeh inyan haTorah.
But I mean, he's talking about pre-Sinai, isn't he? I mean, the creation, the waits were 6, but we're talking about pre-Sinai when we talk about Shishi, the sea one.
Shishi b'Sivan is the Sinai event.
But the Sinai event didn't occur until much later after creation.
Right. So essentially, from the time that Adam was created until the Torah was actually given,
it's not just any Shishi b'Sivan. It's the Sinai giving. It's
correct.
Much later, generations later.
Right. And that's when the Torah is actually given. That in other words, that was the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation is the giving of the Torah at this stage. Obviously, it goes beyond that. But so if the Torah is not accepted, then there's no purpose for creation. So creation will cease to exist.
God would undo this.
Correct. Correct. Without the Torah, there's no reason for God to continue creating. What do we say in Shacharis this morning in Birchas Kriyas Shema? We said B'chol Yom Mechavesh B'tuvo B'chol Yom Tamid Ma'aseh Bereshis. That is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly recreating. I use the idea of a hose.
Based on the giving of the Torah.
Yeah, if you turn on a hose, the water flows through. So there's water coming through it. But if you shut off the hose, so the water stops. God turned on the hose of creation when He created, but He continues creating all the time. So that's very interesting, right? That this Talmud Tefillin is not the same one that existed 5 minutes ago. God is recreating it in a sense. Okay? So depending on the Torah, correct. But that condition was only true from the 6th of Sivan of the year. What year was the Torah given? I think it was 1940. Was it 2448? I think so. I believe it's 2448. What's his name? He says it's 2-4. That's weird. Hold on. Moshe Rabbeinu it's 2448. What did I say?
Yeah,
Is that what I said?
you said 2448.
Oh, got it right. 2448. 48 is easy to remember. Avram Avinu was 1948. No coincidence? I don't know. Avram Avinu, Abraham was 1948. This is 500 years later, right? Which makes sense, right? I think Bris Ben Abbas, it's 500 years later. 1940. I'm sorry. Is it 500? Yeah. So Avram Avinu was born, right? And then the Bris Ben Abbas was like when he's 100, right? And then it's 400 years later. Okay.
How long were we in Egypt?
How long were we in Egypt for? 210 years. But from Yitzchak's birth, it's 400, right?
Yeah.
I
thought that was okay. In there.
Yeah. Okay.
How you got to it.
Right. Okay. So basically, he says, "What's Torah? It tells you how to live your life. It's misader your maisim." That's obviously there's much more to Torah than that, but that's what he says until now. Okay. Okay. Moshe haTorah he seder Adam, kach haTorah he seder shel Olam. The same way the Torah is the order of mankind, the Torah is actually the order of the world. Acha Torah he seder hakol. Rak he seder ha'adam hu nigla mefurish b'Torah. Obviously, the order of humanity is revealed clearly in the Torah. Ki yafshir zil hazeh. It'd be impossible otherwise. Ki ala adam muta lishmar seder haroy eloi. Every person has to keep the order that's appropriate for him. I'll put that in philosophical terms. If God created the world for a reason, and he would have to communicate that reason to his creation, we call that prophecy. Otherwise, there's no point, right? So, in a way, I think that's what he's saying over here. Obviously, it's clear to us what Hashem wants from us, at least in a behavioral sense. But he says, that's true in the micro perspective, but the macro perspective. Somehow or another, the entirety of creation is wrapped up in the Torah. The God looked at the Torah and he created the world. There's a Zohar that says, God looked at the Torah and that was the blueprint of creation.
Oh, but you said creation, so, right?
Create.
So that means that's going beyond just man.
Yes.
If it's plural.
Yeah. But the Torah itself is the order of everything. So therefore, when God wanted to create the world and to organize it, obviously he looked at the Torah and then he created everything. Now, I heard a shiur from Rabbi Twersky, he's a Rosh Hashiv in YU, at Link Thursday night a couple of weeks ago, and he said something fascinating. I'm not going to repeat the whole shiur, and I couldn't possibly do it justice, just off the top of my head like this, without his notes, but the idea that he shared was that was one that is, I think, fascinating, and one that will either blow your mind or really bother you, one of the two. Okay. Do you remember my putty example? Putty. Silly putty, right? If I take silly putty and I roll it into a ball and I show you the ball, so what are you looking at? A ball. If I take silly putty and I roll it into a cube, what are you looking at? A cube. If I take silly putty and I put it into the shape of a triangle, you're looking at a triangle. Now I ask you, is it a ball, a cube, or a triangle? And the answer is, it's silly putty. Yeah? It's none of those, but it's silly putty. I actually asked Rabbi Twersky if he likes the mashal. He didn't tell me yes or no. But, but this is how I explain the idea. Rabbi Twersky said, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. U'misara li Yoshua. Moshe got the Torah at Sinai, gave it to Yoshua. What did Moshe get at Sinai? Did he get God's Torah?
Yeah.
Torah is something that transcends an even understanding of Torah at its highest level is God's intellect. Kaviyachal. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, who's at the 49th level of wisdom and understanding, is incapable of a complete and full understanding of absolute Torah. We'll call it absolute Torah. Objective absolute Torah. What Moshe Rabbeinu got is what he was capable of getting. So therefore, it doesn't say God gave the Torah to Moshe. It says Moshe got the Torah from God. The difference is that when you get something from somebody, you get what you're capable of holding on to, as opposed to when I give you something, I'm giving you the entire thing. So therefore, the mission says Moshe kibel Torah miSinai and u'misara leYoshua, and then he was able to give that to Yoshua. Okay? When the Malachim have this argument with Moshe Rabbeinu, they're saying, and Moshe Rabbeinu argues, well, it says in the Torah this, it says in the Torah that, and you don't eat, so therefore you don't have to keep kosher, you don't have parents to give honor to. What were the angels thinking? The answer is that they had some sort of spiritual Torah that was, in a way, a different perspective on Torah. When God looks into the world and creates the world, he's not looking at the story, at the Exodus story, or a particular mitzvot per se, and creating the world. He's looking at an entity called Torah. Ultimately, that entity called Torah, he gives some aspect of it to Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Torah that we actually have in the Chumash, and the Torah that God looked at to create the world, you cannot take the Chumash that we have and reorder it and look at a literal blueprint for creation. It's not going to work. Because what God looked at in terms of Torah and what Moshe Rabbeinu looked at in terms of Torah is in a way incomplete. What Moshe is looking at in a way is incomplete. Because Moshe is a human being. And by definition, it has to be that way. It doesn't mean that's lacking, because God created the Torah that God gave Moshe with everything we need. With everything that we need. If you're curious about the topic and you want to hear a shiur directly, Rabbi Brander has it recorded. I can get it for you. Okay? But that's the concept. That's the concept. So you have Torah, the macro Torah, and then you have the micro personalized Torah relevant for us human beings. The macro Torah is the order of creation. The micro Torah is the Torah that we have access to, that we can look at, that we can learn, that we can read. Access. Okay.
So they're not the same Torah.
Our Torah is a I don't want to call it an echo of God's Torah. It's aspects of God's Torah. It's pieces of God's Torah, but it's not the totality of God's Torah.
It's for us to discover, in terms of well, I mean,
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. There's plenty to access, right? There's plenty to access, but
Well, isn't that why you need to learn the Torah every day? And why all the text that you learn is because every time you do that, you're gaining new knowledge of it, and you're grasping
discovery of
another. Right. So that's
Torah.
no question. But that's all within the framework of Moshe's Torah. That's why it's called Torah's Moshe, which is fascinating. Why is it called Torah's Moshe, not Torah's Hashem? It is also called Torah's Hashem, right? But it's a very, very deep.
Well, the song is
Torah's Hashem to me, right? But then we say Moshe Emes, V'Soraso Emes.
Using your example of the self-food, you want to do that song.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Psh. Barry, Mamish, you came from the heart yesterday. I'll show this. Okay. I gave you a hard time. All right. Okay.
It's a very mystical thing as to what Hashem looked at the Torah and created the world. What happened there? We have no idea.
The Mahral is the world's greatest mystic.
Yeah. Okay, I wanna.
He was the golem. That's how the golem was created under him.
Possibly.
If there was a golem,
right,
it was under him.
Right. Okay, let's go ahead and skip to the next page, please. Go to where it says Mizeh yesh lecha lilmod. It's about halfway down the first paragraph. Mizeh yesh lecha lilmod.
The next page. What are we looking at?
Here. Yeah, we're skipping ahead. Here we go. Right here. It's on, yeah, you're on the right page, but it's the first paragraph, right there.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just find it on here. Oh, it's actually a couple words before that. Umizeh. People they put the sentence. Doesn't matter. Okay. Umizeh she'olam nivra b'yud mamaros. Just 3 words before that. From the fact that the world was created through 10 expressions, we kind of skipped over most of that. But mizeh yeshecha lilmod. From this you can learn ki gat tzadikim sheshomrim haseder. The righteous who keep the seder. Shesider Hashem yisbarach haSolam, in the way that God organized the world. They're the ones who keep the world going. The hepech ze arishoyim. The opposite is the people who are the opposite of tzaddikim. Kashem yotzim in Torah, when they abandon the Torah, over Masaseder, they transgress the order. Shesider Hashem Yisbarach, b'zemacharivin kol olam, with that they destroy the world. Ki kol olam hu echad mikusha or masuda. The world is all tied together and organized. B'shinoi haseder shesider Hashem Yisbarach, and they're changing the order that God created. Davar zehu shinoi el hakol. That's that's changing everything. Let me put it into better words for us here. Not better, but different words for us. I'll use a silly example. If you have a Lego model, okay, and you follow the instructions, you can build incredible creations, correct? But when you veer from the instructions, you're not going to have the right result, correct? You're going to have a different order, a different creation. I was meeting with somebody last week, and we had this incredible conversation. I say incredible like, it's just like, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. This is a guy who, in his own language, says he flipped out years ago. He became religious, I think, when he was in college. But it didn't stick. Okay? It didn't stick. So he grew up in a very traditional conservative house. So he went to Sunday school and they went to shul every Shabbos, etc., temple or whatever you call it, every Shabbos. But and then he became religious, Orthodox, Torah observant for a while, and then he left it. He's dating a girl, and who's from a traditional Persian background, and she's very, in her own language, spiritual, but knows really nothing about Torah and halacha. And she wants to light Shabbos candles, which is very beautiful. Problem is, she never lights them on time. She lights them on Shabbos. So he says to me in the following language, she wants to make a bracha on an Isser Midaraisa. There's a guy, I'm not even sure he keeps kosher, okay? So, putting aside his double standard, okay? But
why is he making it an issue?
because he says, it's one thing to know what's right and not keep it. It's another thing to make up a new religion. That's his problem with it. And so it's creating a lot of tension between him and her. And he wanted to discuss it with me. But it boggles my mind. Okay? Because he has his own double standards that he owns up to, and he's not shy about it. But he says, if you're going to do it, you have to do it in the way you're supposed to do it. You don't make up a new thing. That's it. In a way, that's the Mahral saying over here. The tzaddikim keep the world going because they're keeping God's order. They're not making up a new order. L'kach amru, therefore, the Gemara says in Shabbos, shekol ma'aseh bereishis hayitulim va'omdim, acha Yisrael mikal maTorah. The world was in suspended animation, so to say, to see what would happen on the 6th of Sivan. She'azay mikal Olam haTorah she'seder hakol, u'bezeh yemekayim makol. That when the Jewish people accepted Torah and said, we're going to keep it, so that's when they give kiyum, sustenance in a way, existence to the world. L'kach amar, going back to that pasuk in Mishlei, v'yoreni v'yomar yitmach devarei libcha, shemar mitzvosai ve'ayeh, which again, God says that, how do we translate it? We said, he instructed me and said to me, let your mind hold on to my words, keep my commandments and you will live. Ki haTorah shehi divrei Hashem yisparach. The Torah are the words of God. Tomeches ha'adam. They support us sh'le'yagil de misa, so we don't die. Now, in this case, death means obviously a spiritual death, but more than that, it keeps the world going. Shatorah mekayim es hakol. Torah gives existence to the world. V'yamar, he says, Shemar mitzvotai v'cheye, or v'chye. Keep my mitzvos and live. Neged ma'aseh mitzvos. That's corresponding to the actual mitzvos. When people observe them, they have a life. V'yamar v'yoreini. Shulashon hora. It's an expression of instruction. Kimoshenikas haTorah b'lashon zeh. What does the Torah say? This is in Devarim, Lamed Gimel Dalid, where it says Torah tziva lanu Moshe marasha kilas Yaakov. We know that pasuk. Okay, Moshe charged us with the teaching. Torah is the teaching. It's not just a wisdom. It's not just an ism. It's not just this biology, and there's sociology, and there's mathematics, and there's all kinds of wisdom in the world, which are true wisdoms. But no, Torah is chachma. I'm sorry, it's not chachma. Torah is Torah is Torah. It's not just another study. Because he hefreshish. Sorry, because there's a big difference Lost my place here. Ki hefresh, there's a big difference.
Are you back on the first page then?
No, we just keep going straight. Ki haTorah mora la'adam es haderech. If you're looking, I'm using a different one online here, but we're just in the first column on page Dalid, a little bit more than halfway down the second paragraph. Neki hefresh yesh. The first word in the line is shar chachma tvuna. Do you see that? Okay. Ki hefresh yesh. He says there's a big difference. Ki haTorah moral adam haderech. Torah instructs you how to live your life, and what's the purpose of the life of the road? That through this road you're going to reach your ultimate purpose. The most a person can possibly achieve. Olam haba, of course, the ultimate being Olam haba. You can't do that through any other chachma. Through Torah we reach Olam haba. That's why Torah has a name Torah. It's an expression of instruction. That ultimately teaches you the ultimate purpose of your life. That a person could attain. That's why he says, and instruct me. I will instruct you and keep my words close to your heart. God is teaching the tachlis ha'acharon, the ultimate tachlis. How you can reach the ultimate purpose, which of course is Olam haba. God created the world in order to give us Olam haba, correct? Olam haba, the world to come, is where the ultimate pleasure and relationship and connection with God is, and that's why God, who wants us to experience that, ultimately created the world. That when my words are guarded in your heart, adam davuk b'Torah, or 3 lines from the bottom of the first column, adam davuk b'Torah, then you'll be with that when you are close to the Torah. Okay, then it gets kind of repetitive a little bit. Okay. All right. We'll leave it here for today, but we're giving a very macro perspective, if you will, on Torah. Not even the study of Torah, but just Torah as a concept. And obviously, in terms of, and obviously the fact that it's given on the 6th of Sivan, which is the holiday of Shavuos. Now the world is in this suspended animation until the Jewish people accept it upon themselves. But the importance of the Torah ultimately to creation and the purpose of creation, starting to get a sense, a feel a little bit for the importance of Torah. It's not just the Torah has a lot of wisdom, let's learn from it, but it's ultimately the purpose of creation, and of course the purpose of us as well, our purpose as well. It's a little bit esoteric, but I hopefully made it in such a way that it wasn't too esoteric.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure. Yeah.
So, would we only be able to accept it, the Torah as we understand it, on the 6th of Sivan, if we had built, only if we had already built the golden path? In other words, by going to the depths that we went to, that was the only way that our minds would now be capable of accepting the Torah as we now understand it. And if we didn't do that, that wouldn't be the case. That was the Mahral about that.
I'm not sure what the Mahral would say about that question. I would say that historically, if you look at the history of the Jewish people, it's interesting that prior to getting the Torah, they were in Mitzrayim. They were in Egypt. And in Egypt, Chazal tell us, they sunk down to the 49th level of Tumah. Those that went further than that died and didn't come out of Egypt. During the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuos, the people somehow or another were cleansed from the 49 levels of Tumah, going up 1 level a day, I guess, until they were able to accept the Torah. After the Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan, they sink down almost immediately, 40 days later, by the golden calf. Then they go through another process of renewal, so to say, when they get the second luchos. There are major differences between the first luchos and second luchos. The first luchos, the Jewish people are at basically like Adam before the sin, where they basically are at the pinnacle of they're already in Olam Haba, so to say, in a way, right? They would have gone straight to Eretz Yisrael, straight to Olam Haba. But the second, and there was no even there was no forgetting Torah, Torah Shabbat Peh, Torah Shabbat everything was all inclusive, and there was a version of the Torah. But I believe it's actually Ramban in this past week's parsha speaks about the difference between the Luchos Rishonos and Luchos Shniyos. But our Torah that we actually have, it's interesting. We really, in a way, we could argue, we should celebrate Yom Kippur as Shavuos, because that's when the Luchos Shniyos were given, right? And our Torah actually is the second Luchos, in a way, right? But maybe we'll get into that. We'll see. I thank everyone for coming and staying after davening on Sunday morning. You're welcome to keep it. If you want, I'll hold on to it. It's up to you. But I'd like to continue. I think this is interesting. And next level, yeah.
Where is the written references into Olam Haba, the soul, the various steps in terms of the soul